thrilled to have you join us today. We wanted to let you know that we've got a few housekeeping things we want to talk about. I'm here today with my colleague Susan Chambers, and we're going to talk about business property tax credits and unit IDs, because guess what? It's time for this to come around again. And if you're anything like me, well, you kind of might remember something about it, but not all the specifics. So we wanted to have a chance to review this with you today. Also, we're recording this webinar, and I'll show you where you can see the recording on the Department of Revenue website as we get towards the end of this session. So the recording will be there so you can review this again if it would be useful. We'll also have the PowerPoint presentation that we're sharing with you today on the website, and we'll tell you where all of that is in just a minute. But before we get started, we wanted, oh, it's not going forward. Oh, this is happening again. Okay, hold on a second. There we go. Before we get started, we wanted to say thank you to ISAC for hosting this webinar and giving us the opportunity to share this information with you. We are extremely grateful for these webinars, and it sounds from the feedback we've had that those who are attending are also grateful for this opportunity. So thank you, ISAC. We really, really appreciate this. Now, today, we're going to be talking about, we're just going to do a little review here of what the business property tax credit and the unit ID process is to get us all back in the swing of this. We'll talk about what is a unit. We're going to talk about retiring units and creating new ones. We're going to review how to upload that unit ID generator file so that those units can receive that unique ID number. Download that unit ID generator file so you can have that unique ID number on your local system. We're going to talk a little bit about timing, and then we're going to talk about how to address your questions. Now, because there are over 200 people on this call, we just want to let you know that we have muted this line so everyone can hear. So that's why we want to make sure we have a way to address your questions so we can get those answered for you. So here we go. Let's get started. We're going to begin with an overview of what the business property tax credit is and what unit IDs are. So now, the BPTC is a credit against tax. That means that on a taxpayer's statement, they see what their tax is, and then they see a credit subtracted from that tax, and then the bottom line is the tax that is due. This is a state-funded program. There's $150 million in the pool. We're into, I believe, our third year with it. And so that tax credit shows up on the taxpayer statement, and then out of that $150 million, the county is reimbursed for the amount of the credit so that your budgets remain whole. So now, this only applies to properties that are classified as commercial, industrial, and railroad. And now that we have dual class property, it would apply to the commercial or industrial component of a dual class property. Applications are received by the local assessor, and the one thing that we have that's included is Section 42 housing, but there is the option for the owner of Section 42 housing to opt out of that special valuation procedure in lieu of receiving the business property tax credit. Now, one thing we do want to share is that if someone makes that decision, it's a permanent decision. There's no going back. So the only time a Section 42 housing would apply is if the owner has opted out. Now, let's talk about who can apply for the business property tax credit. We know you had applications that came in on the 15th of March this year. So any person defined under the Iowa Code, any person can apply. It does not have to be the property owner. It can be any kind of legal entity, individuals, businesses, LLCs, corporations. Doesn't have to be the property owner. We've had some questions recently. Can a tenant of a property apply for the credit? That initial application can come from any person. Does not need to be the property owner. Now, if a property receives the credit and then it is sold, we have a situation where reapplication is needed. And the Iowa Code states that when there is a change of ownership for a property that does receive the credit, that reapplication must be submitted by the property owner. Now, another thing that we wanted to remind you is that this is an interesting tax credit. There is the ability for a correction to be made on the tax credit for up to the end of October, 3 years after the date of application. The date of the initial application. And so we are running into that situation now because this is our 3rd year, and people who applied for the first time might have a correction up to the end of October of this year. So going forward, we need to keep track of the application date so that you at the local offices will be able to manage the corrections process. Now, so if something came along like a PAD case, affected the property valuation or the property classification or the property issues that would impact the business property tax credit, there's the opportunity to make that correction for 3 years beyond the initial application date up to the end of October of that 3rd year. So that's why we want to remind you of that. It's unique among property tax credits. And we wanted to remind you that it's important to keep track of the application date so that those corrections can be properly managed in the event that they are needed. So let's take a look. What we've got going on right now is that you received the applications for assessment year 15 on or before March 15th of this year. So this is all coming to you right now. And then we have a change in the code that occurred last year so that starting on July 1st of 2016, you will be receiving applications for assessment year 16. And going forward, you will be receiving applications as on or before July 1st of each assessment year. And we've got the reference to the code here on the page if that would be of any interest to anyone to look this up. But what this means is we've got an opportunity to do this twice this year, whereas we usually just do it once. So we thought not only would it be valuable to have a refresher on what we're talking about with unit IDs, but also to record this so you can take a look at this presentation again when those applications come in to you as of July 1st. So we have a chance to do something twice that we usually just do once. So that seemed like a good opportunity for some orientation and some refresher and some education and training on this. It's also available for you if you have new members of your staff or just need to be reminded about business property tax credit and unit IDs as you go through the year. So now let's take a look at what is a unit. Now what's interesting about this credit is that it doesn't apply to just a parcel in some cases. It applies to a unit, a property unit. So what that means is that a unit is within the same county, within the same jurisdiction. A unit has the same classification, so all of the parcels, if there's more than one parcel, would be classed the same: commercial, industrial, railroad. There's the same ownership. And please remember that if John and Mary Apple own one parcel and Mary Apple owns a different parcel, that's not the same ownership. Same ownership applies if exactly the same, John and Mary Apple in this example, own all of the parcels that would be in the unit. So now we have a separate item on the tax list that also constitutes what comprises a unit. And please bear in mind that all of this definition is coming right out of the Iowa Code. We have a common use and purpose. So we have properties within the same jurisdiction, we have the same classification, we have exactly the same ownership. Separate items on a tax list, the properties are used for the same use and purpose, and they can be contiguous. We're going to talk just a little bit more about contiguity in just a second. But we wanted to review, these are the components that define what is a unit. For contiguity, the code tells us that we share a common boundary, that contiguity exists within the same building or structure regardless of the boundary, and that it applies to buildings on leased land, like the wind turbines, that are contiguous as long as the land upon which they sit is contiguous, regardless of who owns the land. So that has been one we have talked about on many occasions. So we wanted to be sure that we talked again about buildings on leased land. And if you have any particular questions about this, jot them down as we go through our presentation, and we'll address how to answer your specific questions when we get towards the end of our presentation. Now I'm going to hand the presentation over to my colleague Susan Chambers, who is going to talk to you about retiring BPTC units and creating new unit IDs as you move through this application cycle. Susan?
Thanks, Kay. Well, good morning. So let's talk a little bit about retiring unit IDs. So a couple things before I go to the next slide. We always have to deal with every parcel when we're talking about a unit, so we can't leave anybody behind, no man left behind. And you have instructions from your vendor on how to do a lot of these things coming out of your system. So when would we retire a unit ID? Well, as we're reconciling everything and getting ready for our claims submission in June, we've already got our application, so we're starting to sort that out. There are some events that are going to change, that are going to cause us to want to retire a unit ID. One is changes in ownership, which are pretty easy because you can look at the auditor's transfer list and you can see there's a change in ownership. That's automatically going to cancel the standing application, and it's up to the owner to reapply. Now, you may have a procedure in your office where you're notifying people, but statutorily, that's how it works. The change in ownership is the catalyst for the expiration of that standing application. We might have a change in classification to a classification that's ineligible. There's lots of ways that that might happen, but that's definitely something that you're just going to have to keep an eye on. Splits or combines of property. Now this one gets a little tricky. If you're doing it administratively, then the application is still in good standing. So there could be lots of reasons why you need to do a split or combine that have nothing to do with a change in ownership. So if the ownership didn't change, it just means you still have to retire your old parcel unit IDs, because now you have more or fewer parcels that are in your unit, and you want them to match what's in your tax file. When it comes to doing retirements, there are several vendors, and they're going to have specific instructions for you as to how to generate the file that you're going to upload to IDR. So now let's talk about retiring is one thing. Maybe you have to take something out of the system and you haven't gotten a new application. That's just retiring. Maybe you got a new application. Now you need to create a new unit ID. Those things could happen concurrently, but they don't have to happen concurrently. Your vendor is going to have instructions for you on how to do that, and I'm not going to get in your chili. As we say, if I get in your chili, I'm just going to get cooked. So however you need to manage that. Certainly when you submit something to get a new unit ID, if it already has a unit ID, the system is going to ask you if you want to retire that old unit ID, and you probably do. So that's doing it in one motion. but you could certainly retire it, wait a month, and come back and issue a new one. And it's just about timing, and it's just about however your workflow works. We haven't told you that you have to do it one way or the other. Obviously, once again, those splits and combines are going to come back up. So if you're retiring in order to get new unit IDs for splits and combines, it's likely that your vendor software is going to do that in one fell swoop, but it doesn't have to happen that way. If you're in the middle of this process and you're getting confused, you know what I always say, you're just going to call me. You're not going to do this often enough that it's going to be on your mind and you're going to remember exactly how to do it. So the easiest thing is you're just going to call me, because there's no sense in being frustrated. I'm not advocating for that. Do not be frustrated by this. So if you get a little insecure about it, you're just going to give me a call. So now we've talked about retiring and creating. Now we're going to talk about, once you've decided what you're going to do and you've created your file through your vendor system, you're going to need to upload that file, because somehow you need to tell me, and I need to give you a unit ID. So the way you're going to tell me is you're going to upload that file that you created out of your system. I'm going to move through the screenshots of what you're going to do that. I'm going to go a little bit quick, because later when you watch this again and you just want to follow along, you don't want me to talk a lot. So first thing you're going to do is sign on to localgovexchange.iowa.gov. Now that starts with an HTTPS, because it's a secure site. If there's a gold bar across the top of this that says this is a site for testing, it means that you've gone to the staging site, and that's not real. That's pretend. That's where we pretend. So if there's a gold bar across the top, don't go there. If you're confused, you're going to call me. You're going to sign in using your ANA. As a side note, if you're new to the system and you're not sure whether you are registered with us, give me an email or a call, and we'll double check that, because if you're not a registered user, you will not be able to sign on. It's just going to keep telling you have an error. You're going to click here to sign on. Once you get through the sign on, this is the new screen you're going to see. We have a new look. We're starting to evolve this website. It's going to continue to add more and more programs that are programs that give payments to local governments. So right now you're only seeing the things that have to do with the business property tax credit and the replacement claim, which is what we've been seeing for the last 2 years. More buttons are going to start to appear here over time. So it's going to look a little different than it did last year. For unit IDs, you're going to pick the unit ID button. Sometimes when you click this, it's going to tell you it's a closed session. So one of the things that's going to happen is when we get your claim for credits and it needs to be calculated, unit IDs will close, because we're ending one period and we're going to start another. We can't start the next period until after we've calculated the credits and you've downloaded those. So every once in a while, usually in early July, you're going to click on here and it's going to tell you, hey, this is not available. So don't be surprised if it happens. Once you click that button, you're going to see this screen. When you're uploading your unit ID file, you're going to click Select File, and that's going to allow you to browse to wherever you have located that file. And in different offices, that's going to go to different places. If you need to check the status of your uploaded file, you're going to go to My Files. So you've uploaded your file. All you did was you browsed to it, you clicked Upload My File, and you're done. You're not going to see anything. It's just going to say thank you. If you want to come back and check the status of that, that's going to happen the next day. You're going to click on My Files. Now, if you're an auditor, you're going to see more buttons than if you're an assessor. If you're a treasurer, you're going to see different buttons. They're going to be more than the assessor, less than the auditor. So don't be nervous about that either. So you've waited overnight. You clicked My Files, and you got your file status. Now I want you to notice something here. There's more than one status. So you could delete your file. You could decide that, ooh, I didn't mean to do that at all. It could be complete. That means it went all the way through its processing and it generated unit IDs. or it could be an accepted status, which if you just uploaded it yesterday, it's going to be an accepted status, right? Or it will be in needs review status because you have a little more work to do. File status accepted. This one's a little confusing, and the reason it's confusing is because it doesn't make sense. So if you've reviewed your file and you're only retiring things, it's not going to go to complete status because it didn't generate any unit IDs. It can only be complete if it generated unit IDs. It depends on your workflow. You may be a county that never only retires things, and this will never happen to you. If you're a county that retires things and waits a time period before you try to file and get new unit IDs, this will probably happen to you. If at any time you see a status that doesn't seem right to you, you're going to call me, because this is a new program, and even though we've been running for a couple of years, I never want to assume that it doesn't have a problem. We could do something that we just didn't have the foresight on. So you're going to call me if it looks funny. Now we're going to talk about downloading, which seems like it would be the opposite of what we did to upload, but it's not. We're going to sign back on just like we did before. We're going to go to the Unit ID button. We're going to go to My Files. You're going to see the same thing that you saw before, but it's only a complete button that's going to take you to the download menu. When you click that, this is what you're going to see, and you can see there's a blue bar there that says download your property tax units. When you click on that, you're going to get 3 options. These 3 options are distinctly different, and here's the one thing to always keep in mind. They will always only be the current version of your unit IDs. So we're never going to give you something that isn't true for today. Now, when could that be a problem? What if you did 2 files and you processed one, you reviewed it, and it's generating new unit IDs, and the next day you did one and you reviewed it, but it hasn't generated your unit IDs? Well, that could be a situation where you wouldn't exactly get the 100% right answer if you did all unit IDs. So all unit IDs is going to give you all of the unit IDs that are currently active. So we have to keep our eye on that. We have to remember currently active, so currently generated. My last upload is a little tricky, but the word my is the operative part here. It's only going to be the last upload you did. It has to be your log on. Date range will give you all of them for a specific date range. So if you have 2 staff people who are working these files, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that because it's hard to keep track of who's doing what. But if that was the case, let's say somebody went out on maternity leave, because that happened a few times, we could do date range and you would still get just the ones you recently generated. If for some reason you do have someone that's been working your files and they have to leave the office due to illness, maternity leave, family leave, whatever that is, we can reassign files that are currently uploaded and need to be worked. So that's an option. You'll have to contact me, but we can do that. And I think now I'm going to turn you back over to Kay, and she's going to talk a little more about timing and where you can get some resources.
Thanks so much, Susan. Let's talk a little bit about timing. As we mentioned earlier, we've got the assessment year 2015 applications that came into you on March 15th. And those will be processed, and the assessor receives the applications, and then the information about valuation of the property units is provided by the auditor in what we call a data elements file. And that is required to be submitted and reconciled by the last day of June 2016. That gives us the information we need, the unit IDs and the information that we receive from the applications and from processing those applications, and the valuation data that we receive gives us what we need at the Department of Revenue to calculate the business property tax credit for all of the applicable units in the state. So that comes in, the file comes in, the data elements file, at the end of June, and then we process that credit and post files in early July. And those will show up on the tax statements that are issued in August of 2016. Now, since we've had the change in the law, we'll have a chance to do it again. And I want to back up just 1 second. Let's go back here for just 1 second. Back to this year, assessment year 15. So we've got the window of time between March 15th and the end of June of this year, about 3 months, where we need to manage the splits and combines that occur related to these applications. Now, when we shift to the new time frame, which also begins this year, we'll have those applications coming in by the 1st of July of 16. And the data elements file from the auditor will be submitted June 30th of 2017. So we've got almost 12 months where there needs to be the management of splits and combines starting with assessment year 16. So we just want to remind you to save enough time in your schedule to be able to manage this. It's going to be a much bigger process starting with assessment year 16 when there's almost 12 months of splits and combines that need to be managed in order to process the business property tax credit. So please remember that as we go forward, and allow yourself adequate time to manage this process when we get into 2017. Now, we wanted to let you know that this webinar, as we've mentioned, is being recorded and it's going to be available so you can review it again on the Department of Revenue website. That is tax.iowa.gov. It's an HTTPS website, but you will get there if you just put tax.iowa.gov in your browser and click on that button that says local government. That's where we have all of the information for your offices on our website. So this is the page where we have local government information. It goes on a little bit longer than what we're seeing here, but we wanted to show you where this arrow is. We have created what we call a Property Tax Video Center, and if you click on that link, you will see a recording of this webinar. We're also going to post the PowerPoint presentation that you have viewed this morning. And the other thing we're going to put under that Property Tax Video Center is a more detailed user manual that's been updated for 2016. And so that will give you more detailed information on the things we have been talking about today. Now, Susan mentioned to give her a call as you go through this process if things don't look right or if you have questions. And we wanted to make sure you had her phone number, 515-281-3159. Also, because we understand that so many of the questions about business property tax credit relate to a specific situation with property, with parcels, with classifications, we wanted to be able to address your specific questions and be able to focus on those and respect your time this morning because we know you also have a lot you have to be doing in your offices. So we're going to ask you to send your questions into us at propertytax@iowa.gov. That way we can focus on the specifics of the situation that you are asking about, and we can be respectful to the time of everyone on this webinar and be able to focus on individual questions for each person who has one. So please send your questions in to propertytax@iowa.gov, and we will get responses back to you. Please reach Susan if you have questions as you move through this process, if you need some hand-holding, if something doesn't make sense, if you're not finding the answer by reviewing this webinar or by reviewing the user manual. We are here to help you and to have this be a successful and positive experience for you and for all of those in your staff. We want to thank you for your time this morning. We greatly appreciate that. We are greatly appreciative to ISAC for giving us this opportunity, and I wanted to make sure that we did this for a few minutes while we conclude our webinar so that you can jot down that propertytax@iowa.gov email to send us your questions, and also Susan's phone number so that you can get assistance to step through things when you are in the midst of this and something doesn't quite make sense. We thank you for your time today, and we look forward to working with you and assisting as we can and in any way you need. So thank you so much, and we will conclude our webinar and let you get back to all the things you have to do in your office today. Thank you so much for your time.